People often equate success with happiness. When you talk about being happy, you have to ask yourself, well, do you mean right now? Do you mean right now and tomorrow? Do you mean right now, tomorrow, and next week, and next month, and next year, and a decade from now? And like, are you maximally happy if you're 30 when you're putting away the proper amount of money for your retirement? That's certainly going to be a pattern of action at odds with the impulsive hedonic delights you might be able to indulge in if you spent all that money here and now. And it's not like there's nothing to be said about that, but there's a stability that emerges as a consequence of the willingness to forego impulsive gratification. That's a hallmark of maturity, and maturity works over a longer span of time. So this is the problem with drugs like cocaine, for example. So cocaine mimics intense pleasure. Now, the genuine intense pleasure would be a marker of progress towards a valid goal. And what cocaine does is it provides a proxy for that. And then you might ask yourself, and this is a perfectly reasonable question, well, why not cocaine all the time then? And the answer is, well, it doesn't scale well. And everyone knows this, people who like to drink or people who have their favorite drugs know perfectly well that the few hours that you spend in the grip of the drug can be extraordinarily positive, but that there's always a price to pay. And generally the price exceeds the benefit. You get less sensitive to it, so you have to use more and more. You experience more and more negative emotion chronically, and the upside of the use decreases. And so what that means is that the chronic use of cocaine is a degenerating game. It spirals you down into the abyss. And that's a consequence of the incommensurability of that hedonic pleasure with a longer-term outcome. When you stretch out stability and predictability, security over a long period of time, you're not talking about happiness anymore. You're talking about something more like iterable stability. Now, there's another problem with the notion of success as linked to emotion per se. The error in that presupposition is the implicit assumption that your subjective emotional state is the right marker for what constitutes success. And the problem with that is that it doesn't take other people into account. You might say, well, why should I take other people into account? And the answer is, well, how about because there's a lot more of them than there are of you? There isn't anything worse that can happen to you, on average, than to not be able to get along with people. You're isolated, alone, miserable. You have no one to share your life with. You have no one to help regulate your attitudes and opinions. You're going to drift off into your own sort of solipsistic insanity. We're very social human beings. We're so social that if you take the worst of us, the most antisocial types, literally the worst and most vicious criminals, those who care nothing for what other people think and who are likely to do nothing but wreak havoc wherever they go, you can still punish them by putting them in solitary confinement. So you got to think about that. That means that the most antisocial person still suffers from involuntary isolation. That's how social we are. So if you're evaluating someone for alcohol abuse, for example, one of the things you might ask them is, has it caused you trouble at work? Have you ever got in trouble with the police? Do you have family members who have commented that your alcohol abuse is harming them or yourself? If your alcohol abuse is causing you trouble with the police, or causing you to lose jobs, or interfering with your social relationships, then what's happening is your pursuit of impulsive hedonic pleasure is starting to disrupt the social structure that you have to be embedded in. Now, why do I say have to? Well, this is absolutely germane to the topic of success. So we'll start at the beginning again. You might say I'm successful if I'm happy. Or you might say I'm successful if I'm not suffering. And there are some things to be said for those arguments, but they're not fundamentally accurate. optimized psychological function is something more like multidimensional harmony. If you're well put together psychologically, you might say, well, you're healthy, right? From the molecular level up to the cellular level, to the level of integrated organs, like you're psychophysiologically integrated. And you might say, well, that means that the self ends at the surface of the skin, right? And that health and psychological well-being are an internal and subjective phenomena. And Western culture certainly tilts in the direction of that belief. But it's foolish, because we're not limited in the levels that we manifest ourselves out by what's within. Well, why? Well, how many people do you know that are doing well who don't have an intimate partner? Well, I mean, there's plenty of people with intimate partners who are having a hellish time in their relationship, but all things considered, people would rather have the hell of being with someone than the hell of being alone. And that's pretty much universal. And so it isn't obvious at all that you can be a healthy person and be alone. And that's partly because we are intensely pair bonding as a species. Probably because, at least in part, because we have this tremendous period of dependency. And for that period of dependency to be properly ameliorated by parental care, there had to be a very intense bonding take place between parent and child. And then once the biological mechanism for that long-term bonding became instantiated, it could be transferred to sexual partnership. And so, people call the people they love baby and honey, and they use these childish euphemisms. And that reflects the fact that the same system that bonds a mother to the child also bonds two adults who love each other in a long-term, say, sexually committed romantic relationship. And so we need that intimate partner. That's not an option. Now, that's not only there deeply biologically as a need, it's also there more semantically and conceptually. We organize our brains in part with language. And none of us are that bright. And so it's pretty helpful if we're trying to organize ourselves to be able to talk to other people who can help us. And if you have a long-term partner and the communication channels are open, then what you have are two nervous systems trying to hit a target who are continually communicating, and they're much more likely to remain calibrated appropriately. You come into the world with your set of perceptions and limitations, and your partner comes into the world with her set of limitations and perceptions, and both of you are subject to bias and errors, and you come together, and through discussion you can correct that individual proclivity for bias and error. And that dynamic process of correction is partly what defines mental health, but also partly what maintains it. But then, it's not just the couple, because no couple can stay sane without friends, or maybe no couple can stay sane without children. And I suppose in part that's because of the remarkable advantages children bring to your life. The fact that you now have some additional people around you who actually love you, probably more than anyone's ever loved you in your life, which is not nothing, and who are motivated most fundamentally by the desire to have the best possible relationship with you that could be conceptualized, which is a hell of a gift. But also because, once you have, say, 5 people in the family, you have to negotiate with each other in order for the family to maintain its coherence and stability and desirability. And the consequence of that negotiation is, well, you could describe it as something like iterable success. It's another set of constraints that are placed on the you that would be otherwise just impulsive and insane. A couple nested in a family has to be nested in a broader community, and the same thing applies there, because a community of human beings is a lot more useful than, an isolated family of human beings, because we're all limited in what we can do. But if there's 1,000 of us, we're hardly limited at all. can do virtually anything imaginable. And if there's 20 million of us, well, that just continues to scale. And so to have families integrated into functional communities, neighborhoods, cities, towns, we keep scaling up the social hierarchy of magnitude. There's a proper harmony of function that characterizes that entire ladder. And so you don't want to be thinking that your definition of success is fundamentally subjective. It's a big mistake. You want to be integrated into a hierarchy of social community in a manner that's harmonious. And the harmony is going to be the hallmark of success. You'll be in the right place at the right time doing the right thing.